Welcome to Quantum Flux, the podcast of Nonlocal Science Fiction magazine and nonlocalsci-fi.com. I'm your host, the editor of Nonlocal Science Fiction, Dan Dombrowski. The first issue of Nonlocal Science Fiction features 9 amazing stories written by standout authors from around the world, plus there's one by me in there. You can buy issue number 1 directly through our website, and you'll also find it on major ebook retail sites like Amazon, iBooks, and the Nook Marketplace by Barnes & Noble. I'm joined today by Reva Russell English, author of the short story Marigold's Memory, which appears in the first issue of Nonlocal. We're also joined by Reva's 6-week-old son.
Yeah, he won't have much to comment on that will make any sense, but he'll probably comment throughout the whole thing.
Sounds good. Let's start out talking first about your story, about Marigold's Memory. The core sci-fi concept of your story is an implanted memory chip and allows humans to control what they remember. In this future that you've envisioned, everyone who can afford these chips has them. Tell us where the idea for memory that you can edit, where did that idea come from?
Well, I suppose I'm a bit of a baby in a lot of ways about my life, about the past. And much of what I find wonderful about science fiction is that it sort of gives rein to our wishful thinking and then shows us the consequences of that, which I find really helpful. I feel very beset by memory sometimes in a way that I wish I wasn't. I have good memories, I have bad memories, just like everybody. But I'm amazed at how much my mind sort of swirls around those parts of the past that I'm not fond of. And so in some ways, the story was an exercise in, it was an exercise in what if I could get what I wish, but of course this belief that even if I could get what I wished, it wouldn't go right for me. So not that I'm, the character of Marigold in the story, but with every promise of technology, it seems like there's some side effect or some unwanted secondary thing that happens in addition to it. So of course you've got the entire world able to edit their memories, and then the character of Marigold who isn't, and she's just kind of stuck with the pre-memory chip brain, having to remember the things that she wished she could forget.
I found it interesting that you placed the story 3 or 4 generations into this proliferation of these memory chips. In the world of the story, the governments of the world have long since stepped in and made sure that everyone who wants access to this technology has it. The rich can afford the best chips and the best upgrades, but everyone at least has the basic ability to control their memories. Were you trying to draw any specific parallels to anything in the real world? Is editing memories meant to be sort of an opiate of the masses? Is there a darker angle to the government helping people to forget, or is this just an exploration of memory and what it might mean if you could control it and then lost control of it?
I did not in the story, of course, explore what it means for the government to help us control our memories and to edit things. But yeah, I am nervous about not just like the state's involvement in kind of our progress technologically, but the private sector's involvement in that. I am afraid to some degree, I guess, of what it's going to mean to be human, a few generations down the road, 1 generation down the road even. And so it was more interesting to me to sort of already have this thing in place so that it's assumed. And in a lot of ways, the editing of memory is seen within the story as very innocuous. It's actually not being able to edit memory that is seen as a terrible thing. My belief, however, even with all of my talking earlier about wishing in some ways I could control my memory and alter the past or those sorts of things. I think that with human evolution being what it is, that we're real lucky to still be here. And I don't like how much we're tinkering with things. I am nervous about government involvement, corporate involvement, and all those sorts of things in what it means to be human. And memory is just one place where I think that is probably going to be happening.
Do you have plans at all to expand this universe? Is there more to Marigold's story? Is there more to what other people are going through in this universe that you've created, or was this the exploration of a single idea and that's it?
It was just an exploration of a single idea. I have a couple of other things that I'm sort of mired in right now, but I do think that it could be something to pick up. One of the things that interests me sort of as a lesson unto myself, is the idea that losing track of the things we wish we could forget isn't necessarily going to make us better people. In fact, I think it could be the opposite. And so that would be definitely a storyline that I think could come out of that world, and the idea that memories get edited. I think memory keeps us from being lousy to each other. And, what kind of world is it actually that Marigold's, living in, where everybody can, if they were mean to someone, they can just forget it. If they embezzled a bunch of money, if they killed somebody, whether on purpose or by accident, they can just remove that from their brains. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't been thinking of it, but now that you say that, I am. It's mostly just because I've got a couple of other things on my plate I'm really wanting to get to and get through.
You mentioned some other things that you're working on. Is it other stories in science fiction? Is that your genre of choice, or did this story just happen to come out as sci-fi because you wanted to use the memory chips specifically as a plot element?
I've actually done most of the fiction writing I've done has been more like within realism, but lately I'm finding that science fiction seems to be a genre where I can get more accomplished. I read a lot of science fiction, but that's certainly not all that I read. And so I'm kind of new to that genre as a writer. I'm not new to it as a reader. So it takes, I don't know, writing takes forever for me in general. So I was going to say it takes a little bit longer, but I don't think that's true. It's hard no matter what genre it is. But yeah, the things I'm actually working on are also science fiction stories. So for some reason, yeah, that's where my feet are firmly planted right now.
Should I be looking for other submissions from you in the near future?
Probably, yeah. I mean, near future might be a little bit ambitious, but that would be really nice. Yeah, yeah. I've got a few stories in the works, some of which are parts of some longer things. So we'll see. Having the new babe, plus I'm a musician and have a job and those sorts of things. Finding time, is difficult. I mean, it is for everybody, but right now it's more so than it's ever been for me.
Well, I definitely look forward to reading anything you might be able to send in.
Thanks.
You mentioned you're a musician. What do you play?
I don't play anything very well, but I play guitar. I play banjo. I've been playing bass in a rock band here in town too, which was really cool. But mostly, I'm a singer and I write songs. So that's kind of, I think, where I'm a little better at those things than I am at the musician, like instrumental kinds of things.
When did you start writing? How long have you been writing fiction?
Honestly, I don't remember not writing. My earliest, best memories are of reading. I learned to read. I have a twin sister, and we learned to read before we went to school, thanks to our dad reading to us a lot, I guess. And I think as soon as I could, I just remember penning short stories, little poems, and those sorts of things. So it's been something I've done, although it's definitely been on the side of my efforts for as long as I can remember.
At what point in your writing and in the journey to get to this point did you say to yourself, this is what I want, at least with, you've got the music and everything else, but at what point was writing something that you wanted to do for a living?
Gosh, for a living is such a loaded phrase. Because so few people get to do that. So I don't know that that's still at this point, I would say that I want to write for a living. What I would like to do more is get accomplished and through the stories and novels that I have sort of just sitting around me and in me. I try to focus more on productivity and on getting things outside of myself than I do on whether or not I'm going to be able to sell it or get it published and those sorts of things, which is not to say that I'm not interested in an audience. I think anybody who puts great effort into what they make is most likely hoping somebody cares about it besides themselves, and I'm definitely like that. But I can certainly remember the first time I wanted to be a writer, and it was, if you can believe it, when I was in either preschool or kindergarten, and I was reading a book that moved me so much that I thought to myself, I want to do this. It was the first time I sort of had this, as a very young child, probably 5 years old, just this kind of recognition that the thing that was being given to me, I wanted to also be able to give.
Do you remember what the book was?
I don't. I wish I could. I can kind of see the illustrations, but man, the way memory works, who knows if I haven't superimposed some other story on there. But I remember the illustrations were very dark and moody, and there were lots of trees. I don't remember being scared by the book. I was kind of into scary stories when I was younger, but it wasn't one of those. Yeah, I wish I could remember. I wish I could remember what book it it was that kind of like made me awaken to the possibility that I could also maybe write books, but I don't remember what it was.
You've always struck me in our interactions and the emails we've exchanged as a pretty literary person. Has literature as opposed to genre fiction or more informal, has it a passion for you? Or were you one of those kids in high school who devoured their reading assignments?
I did, and and I was always reading books in addition to my reading assignments. I was blessed to grow up in a family that didn't have a television, so we had to make our own fun, and one of the ways we did that was through reading. I was also raised in a family that was pretty strict religiously, but for some reason my parents never censored my books. So the most freedom I ever had as a child was in reading, and I took full advantage of it, and so did my sister. So I love reading. It's one of the most reliable pleasures that I've known in my life so far.
You mentioned growing up without a TV. Is that something you stick with to this day? Is that something you would intend to raise your own son with?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a TV, so but everybody with a laptop has a TV now. Whether it's with Netflix or, I mean, man, we've watched so much college basketball this season. I live in Lexington, Kentucky, so the Wildcats, I mean, I guess even though I'm a transplant, I bleed blue like everybody else here. So we watch, the equivalent of what television used to be. We just do it on our laptop. But yeah, I think we won't have it be as much of a staple as it is, I guess, in some households. But we're not purists. I'm not a purist about that kind of thing, the way my parents were. So while I hope not to sit my kid down in front of a TV when I'm tired of him or need a break, I also know that there's tons of good stuff, films, television, that I wouldn't want to keep him from. So I don't know. We'll see as we go how that unfolds.
That's true. Saying that you don't have a TV doesn't mean as much anymore. Everyone has a handful of devices. All of them can be used to access media, and very few of them are going to be actual TV sets.
Yeah, the television's ubiquity is just moving beyond television now. So that people who, I don't know, I mean, I guess I could say something, snobby like, we don't have a television, but I'm talking to you on my laptop, and so I know better.
Jumping back a few years, what did you study in college?
I studied religion and philosophy.
Did you have a good idea of what you wanted to do for a career when you went into college, or was it more that you just went to study something and that it was something that you liked?
No, I tried to have a clear view of what I was going to do. I wanted to go get a PhD in theology or philosophy or something like that. It wasn't exactly like what I wanted to do, though. It was, I don't know, like so many 17, 18-year-olds going into college. One, you may not have any idea what you're into or what you like, or you're trying to pick something that will satisfy the demands of your family and your community. And that was more along the lines for me at that point still. No, what I wanted to do was like run away to New York and like be on Broadway. That's what I wanted to do. But when a friend and I were planning that, in a mild way, my mother freaked out, and so we didn't do it. So instead I went to college and went to grad school and, play music in bars late at night now. So
what did your graduate degree ended up being in, philosophy or theology?
I actually went to seminary. I have an MDiv, if you can believe it, Master's of Divinity. So I did that, and I was planning, I even got into a PhD program for theological ethics is what I was going to study, but thankfully it dawned on me that it wasn't really what I wanted to do. It was more of something that was going to satisfy the demands of the culture in which I was raised. And so I just kind of quit after I got my master's degree. I just stopped the studying and kind of went a different direction.
Sure. So have you done anything with the MDiv? Are you active in a church community? Have you applied that in any way?
Have I applied it? I think, like with all things educational, it changed me and it informs me, whether it's stuff that I necessarily agree with all the time or not. I do, when I'm up for it, attend a Quaker meeting here in town. It's an unprogrammed meeting, so there's nobody in charge. It's like I don't know, it's like a group of really like fun-loving pacifist anarchists. So that suits me well. But I'm kind of hit or miss with attendance. Well, mostly just because I guess the baby was born. We haven't been back since he was born, but yeah, I don't think I've really used it. I mean, I'm not ordained. I guess I'm internet ordained because I've married some friends, but I don't know that counts. So no, it's just sort of like, letters that are wasted at the end of my name if I ever wanted to use them. I think a lot of times, though, I feel like, graduate school anymore for a lot of people is like the new way to find themselves or something, or it's just something to like keep your parents off your back while you're trying to find yourself. It's an explanation instead of like, I don't know what I'm doing. At least you can say, well, I'm in grad school. And then everybody kind of leaves you alone to go back to huddle in your closet and wonder and worry and fret about your life.
Do you think college changed you as a writer? You didn't go to school specifically to be a writer, but you'd been writing your entire life. Do you think that your perspectives and your ability to write, and any kind of a humanities, social science-based degree is going to have a lot of writing. Do you think it impacted you at all?
I do, but I think the ways in which it impacted me were mostly that I was, shown a bunch of literature I hadn't read before. I went to a really small college in central Kansas, and I went there so I could play sports. I was an athlete. So college was sort of like, and again, I had a twin sister, so we played sports together. And it was sort of our last hurrah to get to play together, which we both loved and were really lucky to get to do, from middle school through college. But when I was in college, our literature professors, we had such good literature professors and a really great creative writing instructor, professor. And so I was able to do writing in college, creative writing. I read a lot of things I don't think I would have read otherwise. We had a literary journal that a friend of mine in college started up again that had been defunct for decades. So I got to write for that. I got to be the editor of that. It was a great experience for like a small town Kansas girl who hadn't ever had a community of writers that she was around before. All of a sudden in college I did have that, and readers. So I mean, it was the first time I read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. Who else? John Irving. Newer authors too. So it was great. College was certainly helpful for me, and I also think like the kind of small scale, not too taxing programs that were in the school I was in were also beneficial to me because I hadn't had much exposure. I mean, I'd read a ton, but I was self-taught as far as like trying to get through the canon and the classics and things. So I needed some guidance, and I was grateful that I got some.
In the first issue of Nonlocal, there's several authors that are, that have quote-unquote normal day jobs who just write in their spare time. And there's also a couple authors who are able to write and create most or all of the time. It's their full-time job. You and I both fall somewhere in the middle, where your day job is actually it's related to writing. I mean, you've got a couple different things going on, but one of them is at least related to writing. Correct?
That is correct, yeah. I do a lot of, I write a lot of the stuff on the internet that drives search engines and clickbait articles. I shouldn't say clickbait, that's not all they are. I'm lucky for the places I get to work for. So, yeah, but yeah, I'm ghostwriting a ton of the stuff people read on the internet.
Do you consider yourself lucky? Like you said, you're just writing articles to fill up space on the internet, and I've done a little bit of that too. I know sort of what that world is like to some extent. Do you consider yourself lucky to be in the position to make at least a partial living doing what you love, or has working and doing this kind of writing taken the magic out of it for you? Do you just pine for the days when books and writing was this magical, wonderful thing, as opposed to having to work on these projects that are very sterile and organized?
Yeah, I do feel lucky. I think that, and for a number of practical reasons, I'm getting to work while I'm kind of a stay-at-home mom at the same time. I mean, some days that's an incredible challenge depending on my workload, but, we don't have to pay for childcare or have to send our kid to somebody that's not, one of his parents, which is super nice. And I think for me, and this may change, but for me, the writing that I do, I see it as skill building. Again, I was an athlete, and so much of what you do in practice isn't the exciting stuff that happens in games. And so I feel sort of like it's a similar thing. Like I'm practicing fundamentals. I'm doing things that when I turn my hand toward, a story or a song or a poem, I'm honing skills. And so I'm really grateful that somebody's paying me to do a bunch of ditch digging, to get a better foundation as a writer. And so while it can be tedious and I'm not always into it, I also have to confess that I'm not as disciplined of a writer as I should be, but because I have a job, every day I get up and I have to write. And that is going to make me better, and it has made me better. So, I'm grateful, and I need to be reminded sometimes that I'm grateful. I do feel lucky. And again, that could change. Dan, I don't know. How do you feel about those sorts of things? Is it something that sort of squeezes the joy out of it for you?
Mainly more so now that I'm doing non-local, and I'm able to work with some really talented and some really creative folks. I do my main side gig is I edit on a freelance basis for a self-publisher. So I'm editing manuscripts for full books, but they're coming from people who they're paying to get their books made. They're not people who have been accepted by a publisher to have a book put into print. So the quality of them is all over the place, and I'm never directly interacting with these people. I'm always, if I get any feedback from them whatsoever, it's through an intermediary. So there's really no joy in it for me, the way that there is when I'm working one-on-one with the authors in the magazine.
Yeah, I can see that. That does seem like it would be a remarkably different thing.
As far as the freelance work that you're doing and this writing on the side, as you say, you think you're sort of cutting your teeth for something bigger. You're seeing it as digging ditches. Do you have an idea of what you want to do down the line? Do you have an idea of what you're working towards?
I mean, sometimes I let myself, wish for things. But I have, that just reminded me, I've been a waitress for a long time, which is sort of like a standard gig for musicians because I used to be in a band that toured a lot. I had a friend in one of the restaurants I worked at who would tell me that, if wishes were ponies, we'd all have shit all over the floor. And so anytime I think about like the wishes that I have, I always hear his voice in my head. But anyway, yeah, I do. I mean, it would be great to have a bit of income, from creative work, whether that was music or writing. My husband is also a musician and a songwriter, and he's hustling just like I am. But both of us have sort of, I don't mean to sound negative, because I don't mean this in a negative way, and I don't have negative feelings about it. But we've kind of come to terms with both being completely unknown as creative people and always being like paying to play, basically. It costs money to make records. We make them anyway. Writing is great because it doesn't cost the money that making music costs. The gear is much cheaper. Even a laptop compared to an amp or getting into a studio is way cheaper. But let me quit doing this way. Let me just say, if I had my druthers and could have the things I wished, I think that it would be nice if we could make a bit more money with our creative work, and then also, ironically, I think we're both interested maybe one day in farming. My husband used to farm as his main job, and there's still a bit of a, I don't know, we both are really interested in that, like small organic farming and those sorts of things. So, if we could do creative work and also grow more than just like food for ourselves, I think that would be great. But I'm not also going to hold my breath and keep from writing or making music or growing our own food as much as we can in the meantime, just because that may not happen.
It's interesting to me, all the little connections that I'm finding between authors as I talk to them for these podcasts. Dan Colton, the author of A Thin Atmosphere, I spoke with him. He's on the first episode of this podcast, and his day job is he's a reporter for the Rutland Herald up in Rutland, Vermont. But on the side, he maintains a 1-acre plot of land and farms that, and works with local food co-ops, food banks, and helps people get access to fresh foods. So maybe if that's something that you're interested in doing down the line, I'll have to make sure that I connect you up. I'm sure he has some tips for you.
Yeah, we actually have my husband's one of his best friends. He started a farm with him up in Ohio, an organic farm, and that guy has 20 acres now, and fully functioning. Like, I don't know, I can't even remember how many employees he has during the main season now, but it's turned into a really exciting thing. So Andrew's experience, I have no experience. Andrew has good experience, but yeah, it would be great to hear somebody who's doing something as small as 1 acre and able to kind of make it work. That's really exciting.
You mentioned about so you and your husband are both musicians, and how you'd like to be doing something creative, but there's always going to be that cost issue. But that with writing, it is a bit easier because, as you said, you just need a computer and you can get it out there. So what do you have opinions? Have you explored at all the world of indie publishing, of putting whatever you want out there on Amazon and places like that? Do you have designs or thoughts or plans to be an independent publisher, to be an independent author?
I don't. And that may change, but I know myself from being a musician for a long time that I'm even with my best intentions, I'm not as interested in marketing as somebody who's going to go the independent publishing route needs to be. Because I feel like that's the piece that somebody has to have and has to be able to do a really good job at. I'm amazed at how hard you have hustled with this magazine. It's impressive and it's inspiring, and I hope that you're not feeling burned out or it doesn't matter, because it totally does. It's just something that hasn't ever been a very great interest to me. So when I think about independent publishing and those things, I feel like it's a great model for certain types of personalities and certain types of people, and I don't think I'm one of them. That being said, I mean, for a long time, all I've done with stories and poems and things is I email them to my friends who care about my work, and that's been sort of my publishing route. So I don't know. I'm amazed that the independent publishing is as available as it is, but I also know that it's a bunch of noise out there, and just because you get something published when you do it yourself doesn't mean anybody's going to read it any more than if you just emailed it to your closest friends,
So even though you're not looking to participate directly in indie publishing, and putting your books out there and promoting them yourself, do you have any general thoughts about independent publishing and what it has become? Is it a net positive, or is it just, as you say, creating a lot of noise that's preventing consumers and readers from finding good books?
I think anytime anybody is solving their own problems to be heard, I think that's a positive. That being said, I'm more inclined toward print. I'm more inclined toward analog mediums, partly because I'm a bit of a Luddite, and also because of the things that you mentioned. It is hard to find things. You still, I still rely on book reviews from NPR. So that's always been the case, whether there would have been an internet or not. So with independent publishing on Amazon and those sort of things. So yeah, I feel like in some ways it's made some aspects of writers' jobs easier, but it's also made certain things harder. How do you get read? How do you rise above the noise? And I don't know the answers to that. And I would say, based on how many books get published and don't get read, in the same way that how many records get put out and don't get listened to, it's a problem that nobody has quite figured out yet. It seems like it still takes the same amount of money, if not more, than it always did. So whether you independently publish something or not, if you don't have the marketing muscle of a bigger publishing house, or you're not a rich kid, then you're just sort of destined to keep not being read. So yeah, I don't know what the future holds in that regard. Sometimes I think though about Anais Nin. I forget which novel of hers it was. She was trying to get published, and she'd been unsuccessful, so she bought a printing press and printed it herself. I think she printed 300 copies, threw a party for publishing her first book, and sold every single one of them. And that is sort of inspiring. And I feel like the digital thing kind of sits somewhere near that. Although I think that people would still be more inclined for an author to buy their own printing press, print 300 of them, and sell them. I think you'd have an easier time selling 300 that way than you would by going the Amazon route. So part of what I'm interested in more, I think, is while I'm super inclined toward the do-it-yourself model, I still think there's something a little bit more magical about doing it yourself in a more analog way. So if I did ever go like an independent publishing route, I'd probably want to do something that was like real and not just a download.
You've brought up a couple times trying to make it in the music business. I've drawn on the blog and on previous editions of this podcast parallels between what happened to the music industry over the last decade and what is currently happening in the publishing industry, where if you go back to the 90s before MP3s really hit, you had a handful of giant record labels and some smaller subsidiaries, and some indies out there, but really it was too expensive for anybody other than a company to be putting out records. And not that it's cheap now, as you're saying. I mean, there's all sorts of equipment and everything, but it's still much, much cheaper, and you can certainly do it from a home studio much more easily than you could 10 years ago. I see publishing as heading in that same direction, where obviously it's incredibly cheap. It's basically free as long as you have a computer to put a book out there. But rather than relying on independents to put books out, I see a model sort of the way that the music has gone, where instead of half a dozen giant labels, or instead of half a dozen giant publishing houses, you'll have a ton of small independent publishing houses, the way you have a lot of small independent record labels right now, where it takes just a couple motivated people with some resources and with some expertise, and they can rep a few artists, or artists themselves can establish their own labels and bring on other talent. Do you see that kind of a model as sustainable in the publishing industry? Do you agree with me that things might head that way?
I do agree with you that I think things will head that way, and I think that I'm going to say the negative things first, because they're the ones that come to my head like most readily, unfortunately. I think that authors will suffer in the same way that musicians have suffered. I don't know if you've read any of the numbers surrounding Spotify plays. These aren't the right numbers, but you'll have an artist get maybe 1 million plays and make $10. Big artists. And so in some ways part of the way that the music industry has gone is that musicians are just the pie is getting smaller and smaller, even though there's getting to be more and more and more music. And I'm worried that publishing is going to go that route too. And so in my opinion, the people who suffer the most are the people who are the makers in that, because that's the way capitalism works. But that being said, I do think it's that what you described is a great opportunity for people with resources, and I'm grateful that you said expertise, sort of to band together, and people will start to trust smaller publishing houses for bringing in new talent and publishing new books and stories, I hope. And so I think that could potentially be a very sustainable model. But I think it also depends on what you think sustainable is, or what your definition of sustainable is. People used to make a killing in the music business, and they still can if you're a huge artist. But there are plenty of people out there who are, scraping by and making a living. I live in Lexington, Kentucky, and I have people in my bands who are professional musicians in Lexington, Kentucky, making a living. It astounds me, and it also stresses me out. It's why I refuse to play some shows if they're not going to pay us enough, because I've got people who are paying their rent with that money. But it's possible. And I think that, the days of, $1 million signing bonuses, both for musicians and for authors, are numbered, or at least are going to be happening much, much less. And so hopefully what that means is that maybe some of the noise will go away, and you'll only have the people who are really dedicated to the craft sticking around and being willing to put in the time, because they're not doing it for the money anyway. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll have a renaissance of really great writing or something. And we'll be able to find it because there will be people like you and other people who are willing to put in the time and the energy to find voices and try to get them out to others.
Well, we can certainly hope that that's the way things are heading, and I'm trying to do my part the best I can. That about does it for the time that we have today. Once again, I've been talking with Reva Russell English, author of Marigold's Memory, a short story that appears in the first issue of Nonlocal Science Fiction, available now on nonlocalsci-fi.com, as well as through major ebook retailers like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iBooks. Thanks for joining me today, Reva.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Quantum Flux, the podcast of Nonlocal Science Fiction Magazine and nonlocalsci-fi.com. Join me next week when I'll be talking to Thad Knupp, author of the Wasteland Adventure serial Deal Gone Bad. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and our YouTube channel so that you never miss an episode. Music was provided by Kevin MacLeod through incontech.com.